I'm Vinny Politan. Thanks so much for joining us. We begin this hour with a love triangle murder trial case. Now, this one, though, is just a little bit different. Let me walk you through what happened here. Brittany Barron is married to a man named Armando, okay? And it's alleged that Brittany is having an affair with a guy named John Emerald. Her husband, Armando, finds out about it. And the allegations are that Armando acts on that and murders John, but then the wife, Brittany, ends up decapitating her alleged lover. Now, she's claiming that he made her do it, but they've both been charged now. This is a gruesome case. It's bizarre and it's tragic all in one. Let's take a listen to a little bit more about this case.
John Emerald's Facebook page shows a man who loved the outdoors and perilous hikes, but it was his passion for a married woman that led to his death.
This case is especially heinous and gruesome. The brutality of the crime, combined with the fact that the defendant's destruction of evidence was in an effort to conceal a capital murder, is especially alarming and concerning for the safety of the general public.
Emerald was involved with Brittany Barron, and when her husband Armando Barron discovered the affair, it became dangerous for both of them.
Armando beat her severely and threatened her. He put a gun in her mouth, an obvious threat to kill her. He applied enough force to her neck to make it difficult for her to breathe, to the point that she passed out and chipped her tooth in the incident.
Authorities allege Armando Barron kidnapped 25-year-old Emerald on September 19, 2020. Brittany says her husband then forced her to slice her former lover's wrist while he was still alive.
There was evidence that she used a knife from a machete to cut the victim's wrists or hands after he was kidnapped or forced into the car at gunpoint.
Armando is accused of then shooting Emerald to death in a car in Rindge, New Hampshire. Brittany says her husband forced her to cut off her dead lover's head.
After driving Jonathan's body nearly 200 miles north of the crime scene in Jonathan's own car, deep into the North Woods, the defendant decapitated Jonathan, wrapped his head in a tarp, and placed it in a grave.
Brittany's lawyer says Brittany had acted under duress and feared for her own life.
Not only had she been threatened with a gun in her mouth and beaten severely and ordered by Armando to participate in this conduct of destroying evidence, concealing evidence, depending on what aspect of it you're looking at. Armando, in fact, had access to her daughter and later did have custody of their daughter. So beyond fearing for her own life, even after she was left alone, she had no idea what else he was going to go do.
According to the police report, Armando Barron then hid the body at a campsite near Errol in northern New Hampshire. Police charged Barron with capital murder, and he is also charged with beating and threatening his 31-year-old wife. Her mugshot taken at the time of her arrest shows signs of the beating she endured. Brittany has been charged with falsifying evidence. Both husband and wife have pleaded not guilty.
So there you see, I mean, prosecutors seem to concede the fact that she was beaten by her husband, yet she is a defendant in this case. Not charged with the murder, but with falsifying evidence. He's charged with the murder. So she was locked up and trying to get out on bond. There was a hearing. Let's take a look.
Everything that the state alleges that Ms. Barron did, she did under duress, and I mean under duress, meaning direct fear for her life after having been beaten, according to the New Hampshire State Police account of this in their interview with her. If you look at page 4, this really started with her being beaten severely. If you look at her face right now, to the extent that you can see it, she still has the bruising on her face and around her eyes, and it's described in the affidavit. Armando beat her severely and threatened her. He put a gun in her mouth, an obvious threat to kill her. He applied enough force to her neck to make it difficult for her to breathe, to the point that she passed out and chipped her tooth in the incident. She was, to say the least, severely threatened, severely beaten, and placed in fear of her life. The conduct that she is accused of is conduct that she engaged in after having been ordered, according to the affidavit submitted to this court, to engage in that conduct by Armando. I mean, if you look on pages 4 and 5, there's no less than half a dozen times where it refers to her being ordered. And in spite of being ordered under that duress to participate in some respects in this conduct, not willfully, but having to do what she was made to do with fear for her own life, when she was threatened and ordered to harm the victim, she refused 2 times. So to say that she is acting willfully and acted in anything other than under duress, I think is wrong. And the state's own evidence confirms that. That, of course, is from her statement to the police, and I'm sure that's what their response would be. But what they also cannot dispute, and that they would have to testify directly to, is that she then not only provided a statement, but cooperated fully and led to the discovery of evidence, which ended up in Armando being arrested. In plain English, she helped solve this crime, and rather than conceal evidence or falsify evidence, she led the police directly to evidence. She was beyond cooperative. I mean, it's hard to imagine being beaten like that, threatened with your life in this situation, and being fearful and then cooperating with the police. And yet that's what she did by the account of the police. So to say that that the weight of the evidence is significant here is the opposite of what the state has presented. Her injuries were confirmed by a trip to the hospital and by the testimony of the state troopers. When you add the fact that they don't have a lot of weight of evidence regarding these 3 charges, the fact that she's not accused of violence against any person, and that she's cooperated, and then you look at her personal background, to my knowledge, she has no prior criminal record. She's been a resident of New Hampshire for the past 6 years. She's been living in Jaffrey and employed. Our proposal would be that she be released on electronic monitoring and continue to live at the same address in Jaffrey. We would agree to any reasonable conditions of that release. I would note that she has a minor child that is obviously involved in this case. That child needs her mother. She is a 9-year-old daughter. And there's simply not a good reason to detain her here when you think about the factors that we look at. Is she going to show up for court? Obviously, and electronic monitoring will ensure that she shows up and that we know where she is. Is she a threat to the community? There's no evidence whatsoever that she's a threat to the community. The evidence is that she's a victim who cooperated with the police. So our position is that she should be released on personal recognizance bail with a special condition of electronic monitoring under the supervision of the Cheshire County House of Corrections.
There's no doubt, and the state does not deny that there is substantial evidence that the defendant was assaulted by her husband, Armando. However, while there are factors surrounding her crime that may have impacted her decision to commit those crimes, those factors were taken into consideration when the state evaluated what charges to seek, and more importantly, are factors that are for a jury to consider in determining her guilt, not in determining her threat to the community. For example, defense counsel said that there was no evidence of violence. There was evidence that she used a knife from a machete to cut the victim's wrists or hands after he was kidnapped or forced into the car at gunpoint. Again, those charges weren't brought out of consideration for the facts and circumstances surrounding the incident. However, to discount the fact that the defendant drove nearly 200 miles in a separate vehicle with a cell phone on her person in transporting the body for 3.5 hours approximately, Your Honor, with multiple opportunities anywhere in between Ringe and the scene of her crimes, demonstrates that she had multiple opportunities to avoid committing the crimes that she is currently charged with. Another example of that is the steering wheel itself. Her cleaning that steering wheel was after Armando, as Your Honor can see in the affidavit, had gone to destroy other evidence. Beyond that, Your Honor, she did cooperate. She cooperated after she was caught. She had multiple opportunities prior to being caught by New Hampshire Fish and Game to seek help, to avoid, regardless of, in addition to the 200 miles that she drove and had the opportunity to prevent herself from feeling like she needed to commit any other crimes. The incident of the hunters, 3 different times or at least twice where she had opportunities with those hunters to say, I need help. Armando wasn't there. It was her and the victim's body. And she did nothing to alert the hunters or any authorities that she needed help. But instead, she continued to participate in an effort to conceal evidence, to prevent the discovery of that evidence. And again, we're talking about in a crime of capital murder. In a heinous crime, she was participating in hiding, destroying, or concealing evidence that could have prevented the detention from an alleged murderer, which is the most dangerous situation that could have happened, is if he failed to be apprehended or charged with these crimes because there was no evidence. So the fact that the case is ongoing, the fact that evidence is continuing to be discovered and to be processed is support for the clear and convincing evidence that she is a danger to the public. While the state recognizes that the defendant has been cooperative and has assisted investigators, this case is especially heinous and gruesome. The defendant wrapped Jonathan's body in a tarp and dragged him deeper into the woods where investigators found him in a shallow brook. This was all with the intent to conceal a capital murder. Had this defendant successfully destroyed that evidence, her husband, the alleged murderer, may very well have evaded detection and or apprehension. And currently, Your Honor, the investigation is ongoing. Evidence is still being collected and processed. If released, there are no guarantees that this defendant will not attempt to further conceal or destroy any other evidence. And for those reasons, Your Honor, in the facts in the affidavit, there is clear and convincing evidence that releasing the defendant will endanger the safety of another person or the public. And accordingly, the state, again, requests that the court order preventative detention.
All right, passionate arguments from both sides, but preventative detention, okay? Those were the magical words that resonated with the judge, who then issued the decision not granting bond. So she is locked up for falsifying evidence. Again, she's not charged with the murder. It's also been conceded that she was beaten by her husband. But you heard what the prosecutor said. I mean, she's alone in the car with the body. She slit his wrist while he was still alive. She had her phone with her for 3.5 hours and never called anyone and didn't say anything until they got caught. And you feel bad for John Amaral. I mean, my goodness, that must have been absolutely horrible. The end of his life after being kidnapped and his wrist slit and then shot. We'll continue to track these cases, folks, obviously. All right, when we come back, we'll have the latest on the latest impeachment next.